Early 1944. Long before the first landing craft touches water, the invasion of France exists as paper. Vast tables in London are covered with maps, Normandy sketched in blues and browns, arrows pressing eastward, tide tables annotated in pencil, beach gradients measured down to yards. The war's most ambitious operation is still silent. Yet inside these rooms, the sharpest tension is not geographic. It is human. Dwight D. Eisenhower enters this moment as supreme commander of a coalition, not a nation. Every decision he makes carries two weights. One is military necessity, cold, mathematical, unforgiving. The other is national dignity, fragile, emotional, and capable of undoing strategy faster than any German counterattack. He does not command an army alone. He commands pride. Britain arrives at this moment scarred and exhausted. 5 years of war have thinned its manpower and hardened its expectations. The public does not ask for brilliance, it asks for safety, competence, reassurance. Before the gamble across the Channel begins, Britain needs a familiar figure, someone who looks like control itself. America arrives differently. Its factories are roaring, its divisions multiplying, its confidence expanding as quickly as its reach. The American public expects momentum. It expects its best generals not merely to participate, but to lead, to embody the decisive force of a rising power. Into this balance step two men who represent more than themselves. Bernard Montgomery is placed forward, the visible face of the land battle. Methodical, deliberate, unmistakably British. George S. Patton, equally unmistakable, is held back, present, dangerous, but restrained, like a blade still in its scabbard. This is not an accident of planning. It is a deliberate sequence. Eisenhower sees roles before he sees personalities. One general to hold a fragile foothold under fire, another to unleash movement once survival is assured. Yet he also understands how such choices will be read, not by history, but by newspapers, parliaments, and mess halls. Winston Churchill sees the danger immediately. He has lived long enough to know that wars are not only lost on battlefields, they can fracture in rooms like this through wounded pride, whispered resentment, and the slow corrosion of trust. The invasion can fail on the beaches, or it can fail here before the first landing craft moves, if the alliance begins to pull against itself. And so the cold open closes not on a plan, but on a question, quiet, precise, and heavy with consequence. When Eisenhower chooses Montgomery over Patton for D-Day's ground command, what does Churchill say to prevent victory from tearing itself apart before it begins? The crossing of the English Channel is more than a military maneuver. It is an argument with history itself. If the Western Allies do not return to France, then force, not law, not legitimacy, will decide the future of Europe. D-Day is framed not simply as an invasion, but as a moral claim, that occupation cannot be permanent, and that power gained by terror must eventually be confronted. Each partner in the alliance arrives at this moment carrying a different weight. Britain brings experience, hard-earned, costly, and incomplete. It brings proximity to the continent, and scars from Dunkirk, the Blitz, and years of attrition that have stripped the margin for error thin. America brings something else, numbers that keep growing, machines rolling off assembly lines, and a confidence born of expansion rather than survival. Together, they form a force powerful enough to challenge Germany, but only if they move as one. Time becomes the quiet antagonist. Every delay risks surrendering initiative, allowing German defenses to harden, suspicion to grow, and political will to erode. Yet every premature move risks catastrophe. A failed landing would not simply cost lives, it would poison the future. Timing in this moment is not just tactical, it is ethical. Commanders are deciding when it is permissible to ask men to die, and when waiting becomes its own form of cruelty. This is why the structure of the coalition matters as much as the size of its armies. A supreme commander cannot merely coordinate movements, he must arbitrate ambition. Without unity, authority dissolves into parallel commands, each correct in isolation and disastrous together. Eisenhower's task is not to prove brilliance, but to impose coherence, quietly, relentlessly, and without appearing to favor one flag over another. Within this framework, the contrast between Montgomery and Patton sharpens. Montgomery's method promises caution, cohesion, and losses kept within limits that a weary nation can endure. His style reassures Britain that survival will not be gambled lightly. Patton's method promises something different: speed, shock, and relentless exploitation. The belief that momentum itself can save lives by ending wars faster. That promise resonates with an America impatient to convert power into decision. Here lies the first revelation of D-Day. The choice of commanders is not merely about skill or seniority, it is about belief. What each nation must see in the mirror before asking its soldiers to step into the surf. And as those beliefs harden, another question begins to surface, one that will shape every decision to come. Can a single invasion carry two national expectations without tearing itself apart before it reaches shore? Bernard Montgomery arrives at the edge of overlord, carrying a reputation forged in method. He prepares slowly, insists on clarity, and demands discipline that borders on obsession. To his admirers, he is a commander who refuses to spend lives casually. To his critics, he is rigid, yet no one doubts his focus. Montgomery believes wars are won by identifying the main objective and grinding toward it without distraction, however long that grind may take. George S. Patton arrives with a different legend. His brilliance is kinetic, his instincts aggressive, his presence unmistakable. He believes speed is a form of mercy and hesitation, an invitation to disaster. But Patton's greatest liability travels with him wherever he goes: his mouth. The same blunt force that drives his armored columns forward can fracture alliances behind him. What his tanks may later save, his words can endanger in advance. Eisenhower does not study these men as rivals. He studies them as instruments. The invasion of France is not a single act, but a sequence. First comes survival, holding a fragile foothold under relentless pressure, when retreat would be easier than advance. Then comes exploitation, movement, pursuit, and collapse. In Eisenhower's mind, Montgomery is suited to the first problem, Patton to the second. The mistake would be to use either out of order. Churchill views the same figures through a different lens. He sees not only generals, but symbols. Montgomery reassures Britain, a familiar figure who suggests control rather than gamble. Patton electrifies America, a promise that the war will not be fought timidly. Both are assets, both are risks, and neither can be fully managed once unleashed. Privately, the central question shifts. It is no longer, who is the better commander? That debate leads nowhere. The real question becomes, what can the alliance survive if things go wrong? A slow advance under a British general invites American frustration. A reckless disaster under an American general invites British disillusionment. The danger lies not in defeat alone, but in how defeat would be interpreted. The shape of the plan begins to emerge with quiet inevitability. Montgomery will be put forward first, visible and responsible for the landing. Patton will be held back, intact, waiting for the moment when momentum matters more than reassurance. This is not improvisation, it is design. And as this design settles into place, the shock of it becomes clear. The invasion of Europe will not be entrusted to a single genius. It will depend on a sequence of temperaments, care before fury, restraint before release, and the hope that timing can tame even the most dangerous strengths. By early 1944, Britain's war is no longer measured only in battles won or lost, but in margins. Manpower is thinning. Replacement drafts arrive smaller each month, and many of the men crossing the channel will be veterans already marked by earlier campaigns. The country does not demand brilliance anymore. It demands victories at a cost it can still endure. Survival has become arithmetic. Winston Churchill understands this instinctively. He has led Britain through moments when morale was as decisive as material. In war, he knows some names carry weight the way ammunition does. They reassure before the first shot is fired. They tell a tired nation that someone steady is in control, that risk is being measured, not indulged. Bernard Montgomery fits this need almost perfectly. His image is austere and deliberate. He speaks of preparation, of protecting infantry, of refusing to attack until conditions are right. To critics, this sounds slow. To Britain, it sounds responsible. Montgomery projects safe competence, a commander who will not gamble with what the country can no longer easily replace. Eisenhower's decision to place Montgomery in command of the initial land battle reflects this reality. Militarily, the early phase of D-Day demands consolidation more than brilliance. The first task is not to race forward, but to survive, to absorb counterattacks, link beaches, and prevent the lodgment from being crushed. Politically, the appointment signals respect for Britain's sacrifice and experience. It becomes a compromise between battlefield logic and alliance optics. Yet compromises leave bruises. Patton's supporters read the decision as a slight, a suggestion that American aggression must wait its turn. British staff officers, long accustomed to carrying the heaviest burden, see it as overdue recognition. Both sides feel justified. Both sides feel wounded. And wounded pride is a volatile element to introduce into an invasion plan. Churchill watches this reaction carefully. He is less concerned with the arguments themselves than with what they might become if left unattended. In his mind, the logic sharpens into something almost slogan-like. Montgomery's presence does not merely command troops, it signals victory. To Britain, seeing Monty at the front suggests that the war is being fought in a way the nation understands and can psychologically survive. This belief hardens not because it is perfectly true, but because it is necessary. Churchill does not mistake reassurance for strategy. He understands that morale is not a substitute for force. But he also understands that force without belief collapses under strain. In a coalition war, perception can become a form of strength. Here, the first moral irony emerges. The best choice in war is not always the most aggressive or the most gifted. Sometimes it is the choice that keeps partners from breaking under the weight of expectation before a single decisive battle is fought. And as Montgomery steps forward carrying Britain's confidence with him, another question lingers just behind the decision. What happens when reassurance begins to look like hesitation? And how long can belief survive the strain of reality? George S. Patton's value on the battlefield is not in question. His record is written in movement, armored columns advancing faster than doctrine allows, enemies unbalanced by speed they cannot predict. Yet in early 1944, the coalition confronts an uncomfortable truth. Reputations are weapons too, and Patton's is unstable, powerful, and capable of detonating in the wrong hands. The invasion of France cannot tolerate distraction. On the eve of the largest amphibious operation in history, there is no margin for scandal, headline warfare, or internal controversy. Patton's past indiscretions, spoken in heat, remembered in print, linger in the background. Eisenhower understands that even a whisper of impropriety could ripple outward, drawing attention away from preparations that must remain disciplined and quiet. His calculation is cold, but not punitive. Patton is not sidelined because he lacks ability, but because his ability must be preserved. Eisenhower intends to keep him intact for the phase of the war where aggression will matter most: pursuit, exploitation, collapse. For now, Patton is kept out of the limelight, his presence contained, his energy stored rather than spent. The Germans, meanwhile, fear Patton in a way they do not fear most Allied commanders. Intelligence assessments, intercepted rumors, and long memory combine to elevate his name into something larger than a man. To German planners, Patton suggests chaos and speed, a commander who breaks rules and lines with equal enthusiasm. Expectations begin to harden around him. Churchill recognizes the opportunity hidden inside the problem. If Patton is not visibly present in Normandy, the absence itself becomes information. The enemy may conclude that the true blow is still coming elsewhere, that the invasion in France is a feint, and that Patton's eventual appearance will signal the real main effort. A feared general held in reserve can pin enemy divisions in place without firing a shot. This strategic gift comes at a personal cost. Patton struggles with the role assigned to him. He is trained to command armies, not illusions. To be used as a phantom, to know that one's greatest contribution is to be seen doing nothing, cuts against his identity. Yet even in frustration, he senses the grim logic of the mission. Victory sometimes requires the denial of glory. As belief hardens into assumption, arrogance creeps in on all sides. Britain assumes it must lead the opening act because it has paid longest in blood. America assumes it should lead because it now carries the weight of power. Eisenhower must lead them both, without allowing either to feel diminished by the necessity of compromise. And in this delicate balance, another tension begins to form, quiet, unresolved, and dangerous. How long can restraint be mistaken for weakness before patience itself becomes the next risk to manage? When Winston Churchill speaks on the question of command, he does not frame it as a contest of personalities. He speaks instead in the language of survival. Unity first, ego second, because disunity is the one defeat the Germans do not need to earn. Tanks can be destroyed, plans can be rewritten, even landings can be delayed. But once an alliance fractures, no timetable can repair it. Publicly, Churchill supports Eisenhower's decision with careful emphasis. He frames Montgomery not as a triumph of British pride, but as a stabilizing choice for the most perilous phase of the war. The first days in Normandy will not reward daring alone. They will punish haste, confusion, and exposed flanks. In such moments, caution can be a form of bravery, an insistence on holding ground when retreat would feel easier than discipline. Privately, Churchill is more candid. He understands the American sensitivity at stake. Placing a British general in a visibly senior role over prominent Americans risks inflaming suspicion that old empires are clinging to influence they can no longer justify. Such arrangements, he knows, must be handled with tact and limits. Montgomery's authority must be clear, but not expansive. Temporary, not territorial. At the center of Churchill's concern stands Eisenhower himself. Churchill treats the Supreme Commander's burden as political as much as military. Eisenhower must command not only armies, but national pride. He must issue orders that will be obeyed by men who represent countries with their own histories, press, and parliaments. In Churchill's mind, this makes Eisenhower indispensable. Only an American can hold this coalition together, and only if his authority is seen as unquestioned. Here, Churchill offers the logic of leadership rather than rhetoric. The coalition must appear harmonious even when it is not. Perception, he understands, sustains momentum. Soldiers fight better when they believe their leaders agree. Civilians endure sacrifice longer when they sense unity at the top. Discord, even when justified, becomes a luxury the moment the first landing craft moves. Churchill's deeper point emerges slowly but decisively. The invasion is a single spear. Montgomery may shape the shaft. Patton may become the blade. Eisenhower must grip it firmly enough to strike. But if the shaft splinters in argument, if pride cracks alignment, the point never reaches France. Strength without cohesion becomes self-defeating. This is why Churchill chooses his words with care. He shields Montgomery just enough to protect British morale, while buffering Eisenhower from the implication that he is deferring to British wishes. He presents the decision not as a concession, but as a structure, deliberate, temporary, and necessary. No one is diminished. Everyone is required. As this belief phase closes, the balancing act becomes clear. Churchill is not defending a general. He is defending a fragile architecture of trust. Montgomery stands at the front for Britain. Eisenhower stands above them all for the alliance. And for now, that structure holds. But belief, once tested by reality, can harden or fracture. And the moment the first boots touch sand, words will no longer be enough to keep the spear intact. Once placed at the center of the land battle, Bernard Montgomery does not merely accept the existing outline of Overlord. He challenges it. The original plan, in his view, concentrates risk too narrowly. Too few divisions, landing on too thin a front, leave the invasion vulnerable to being thrown back into the sea by a coordinated German response. Montgomery insists on a broader, heavier initial assault. More beaches, more men, more firepower committed at once. Survival, he argues, must be overwhelming. The plan responds like a living machine. Expanding the landing front demands more landing craft, which in turn requires more ports, more escorts, and more training cycles. Additional divisions require expanded air cover, longer bombardments, and deeper logistical preparation. Each improvement forces a compromise elsewhere. Nothing can be added without something else being stretched thinner. Eisenhower permits the changes because the beaches will not reward pride. They will reward mass, clarity, and redundancy. In an amphibious assault, there is no elegance, only accumulation. If one unit falters, another must already be arriving. If one beach bogs down, another must still hold. Eisenhower accepts the rising complexity because simplicity, at this scale, is an illusion. Churchill watches the revision with mixed emotion. Politically, the expansion reassures Britain that the landing will not be a gamble born of impatience. Operationally, it fills him with dread. Bigger plans fail bigger if they fail at all. The resources committed to Overlord now approach the edge of what the Allies can assemble in one place. There will be no second attempt of this magnitude if it collapses. In headquarters across southern England, the cost of these decisions is felt in small rooms under poor light. Staff officers work by lamplight, adjusting tide tables by minutes, artillery schedules by seconds. A single miscalculation could strand men under fire or drown them before they reach sand. Maps are folded and unfolded until creases soften. Each adjustment carries the unspoken weight of thousands of lives. From the margins of this process, Patton watches. He senses the truth of his assignment. He has been given the future, not the present. The invasion will need motion later, but first, it must exist. For now, his role is to wait, useful but sidelined, while others carry the burden of the opening collision. As the plan expands, a quiet revelation settles in. D-Day is not one decision, nor even a series of grand choices. It is a chain of linked engineering judgments, boats, tides, air corridors, supply routes, where one weak link can drown an army. And as each link is tightened, another question emerges. When the moment comes, will this immense machine move forward as designed, or will its very weight become the next obstacle to overcome? In the months before D-Day, innovation takes on an unfamiliar form. Not every breakthrough involves steel or explosives. Some are built from absence. Deception planning turns reputation into operational art, proof that an army can be constructed from radio traffic, canvas, and rumor. In this war, belief itself becomes a terrain to be shaped. George Patton's continued presence in England is no oversight. It is deliberate misinformation. His movements are visible, his headquarters active, his name attached to formations that exist more on paper than in steel. German intelligence reads him like a weather forecast. Where Patton is seen, they expect the storm to break. Where he is not, they assume patience is required. Churchill understands the psychological economy at work. Fear concentrates attention. A feared general pinned in place can hold enemy divisions in place as well. Panzer units remain anchored near the Pas de Calais, waiting for a blow that never comes. In this way, Patton commands without commanding, his reputation exerting pressure across the Channel without firing a shot. For Patton, this role is a private trial. He is built for motion, for the visible exertion of command. To be reduced to a symbol, to know that his greatest contribution is to be watched rather than to act, feels like erasure. Yet even in frustration, he begins to sense the grim purity of the mission. Victory, in this moment, requires denial. Glory must be postponed so that others might survive the first collision. Eisenhower's discipline reveals itself here as a form of innovation. He resists the temptation to deploy strength visibly, choosing instead to weaponize patience and secrecy. In an age that celebrates speed and spectacle, restraint becomes the sharper instrument. The absence of Patton from Normandy is not a weakness to be explained away, but a signal deliberately misread by the enemy. Across southern England, soldiers rehearse their landings again and again. They practice under the assumption that the enemy may be watching, but not what truly matters. Inflatable tanks sit in fields. False radio chatter fills the air. Entire formations exist to be seen rather than used. War is fought in mirrors, where shadows are encouraged and substance concealed. The effect is cumulative. German commanders hesitate. They reinforce the wrong coast. They wait for Patton to appear, convinced that Normandy cannot be the main effort if its most feared American general is absent. The illusion holds just long enough to matter. On the beaches, fewer German divisions arrive in the critical first days than might otherwise have done so. Here, the deeper truth becomes unavoidable. Putting Montgomery forward and Patton behind is not only politics, it is choreography. One general absorbs attention, the other absorbs suspicion. Together, they shape enemy perception as much as friendly morale. The illusion is coordinated, deliberate, and costly to those who must sustain it. As this phase closes, the listener confronts a hard reality. Lives on the beaches may depend not only on firepower and courage, but on how convincingly an absence is maintained. And somewhere between rumor and reality, the war waits to discover whether deception can hold long enough for steel to do its work. Beneath the visible preparations for invasion, another conflict unfolds, silent, persistent, and no less dangerous. British commanders fear becoming junior partners in a war they have carried since its darkest days. American commanders fear being restrained by a caution they did not choose and do not fully trust. Each side reads the same decisions through a different memory of sacrifice. Bernard Montgomery's confidence sits at the center of this tension. To some, it reads as certainty, the steadiness of a commander who knows his task and refuses distraction. To others, it sounds like condescension, an implication that patience is wisdom and impatience immaturity. Tone, in coalition war, becomes substance. The same sentence reassures one ally and alienates another. Eisenhower's authority is tested daily in ways that never reach the battlefield. He must mediate between men capable of commanding victories and of sabotaging unity through pride alone. Orders must be clear without sounding imposed. Compromise must feel like collaboration. Every directive carries the risk of being interpreted not as necessity, but as preference. In this delicate space, Churchill becomes the bridge. He uses encouragement where it will be heard, warning where it must be delivered, and charm when neither suffices. He understands that military pride, once politicized, hardens quickly into grievance. His task is to keep disagreements from crossing the invisible line where they become national rather than professional. Often, these struggles leave no trace in official communiques. A meeting ends politely, hands are shaken, and the record shows agreement. Yet the real battle continues elsewhere. in diaries written late at night, in memoranda, that choose one adjective over another, in the clipped tone of a single sentence that signals irritation without stating it. This is how coalitions erode, not with arguments, but with accumulation. Patton feels this strain more sharply than most. His identity is action. His usefulness now is restraint. To be told that patience is his contribution feels like a denial of self. The paradox corrodes him. He is essential precisely because he must not yet be used. Few commanders are built for such a role, and Patton is not among them by temperament. As the invasion approaches, the atmosphere settles into an ominous calm. The plans are complete. The machines are assembled. The men are trained. Yet beneath this readiness, the coalition's nerves are exposed. Confidence is brittle. Expectations are misaligned. And everyone involved understands, whether they admit it or not, that nerves break under shock. The question that lingers is not whether the invasion can succeed on paper. It is whether, under the first real collision, the quiet war inside the war will remain contained, or finally demand its own reckoning. In late May and early June of 1944, a new commander asserts itself. The weather moves into the center of the plain, winds rising, clouds thickening, seas roughening enough to cancel years of preparation with a single forecast. Armies wait while barometers decide whether history will advance or stall. No amount of courage can overrule the channel. For Eisenhower, the role he has rehearsed for months changes in tone. He is no longer an organizer aligning parts, but a judge weighing consequences. He must select a day that will determine the fate of thousands within minutes of first contact. Delay risks unraveling secrecy and morale. Action risks catastrophe. The decision cannot be delegated. It must be owned. Montgomery's focus narrows as the hour approaches. He prepares the initial battle not as a dramatic dash inland, but as a controlled grind. Objectives are limited. Timetables are cautious. The priority is cohesion, keeping units connected under fire, preventing panic from spreading faster than orders. If the first day holds, the war can move. If it breaks, nothing that follows will matter. Patton remains outside the spotlight, measuring time differently. He watches the clock, not the beaches. His moment will come only after others survive the first collision. Readiness for him is patience under constraint. He prepares for release while accepting that release is not yet his to command. Churchill presses close to the enterprise, drawn to its scale and symbolism. He understands that leaders cannot truly spectate. Their presence alters morale, their words amplify tension or calm it. He must balance proximity with restraint, inspiration with silence. This is not a moment for speeches, but for steadiness. Somewhere among the waiting divisions, a soldier sharpens a bayonet. He wonders briefly whether the arguments in distant headquarters matter to him. Then he remembers that orders come from those arguments, that timing, targets, and support are all born in rooms he will never see. The abstraction hardens into reality in his hands. In the final hours, the structure locks into place. Eisenhower confirms the sequence. Montgomery first, Patton later. Anchor before blade. Churchill commits himself to supporting that structure without reservation, understanding that unity has now become a weapon as real as any landing craft or bomber. As the decision settles, silence spreads. The question is no longer who should lead or when ambition will be satisfied. The only question left is whether this carefully balanced architecture of weather, will, and alliance will hold long enough for the first men to step ashore. June 6, 1944 arrives in noise and confusion. The beaches are taken at terrible cost, and by nightfall the invasion has not been thrown back into the sea. This alone marks success. Yet the real test of D-Day begins after the first foothold is secured, not before. Survival has been achieved. Now momentum must be found. In the British and Canadian sectors, progress is slow and grinding. Objectives are contested yard by yard. Caen, designated as an early goal, remains stubbornly out of reach. The city becomes more than a tactical prize. It hardens into a symbol. Strategic because it anchors German defenses, psychological because it resists expectations, political because its delay demands explanation. Montgomery's style dominates this phase. His operations are measured, methodical, designed to fix enemy forces rather than to dazzle. Losses are controlled, but advances are incremental. To some observers, this looks like prudence. To others, it looks like hesitation. Expectations formed in briefing rooms collide with the reality of bocage, armor, and resistance that refuses to collapse on schedule. American voices begin to question whether speed has been sacrificed. The promise of rapid exploitation feels deferred. British voices begin to ask whether caution is being misunderstood, whether holding the enemy in place is itself the achievement. Each side views the same map through a different assumption about what success should look like. Churchill's position becomes increasingly delicate. He must defend Montgomery strongly enough to preserve British confidence, yet not so forcefully that American commanders feel their concerns are being dismissed. Every public statement carries double meaning. Praise can sound like defiance. Silence can sound like doubt. Somewhere near the front, a wounded infantryman experiences the reality behind these debates. He learns that arguments in distant headquarters do not remain abstract. They become the pace of stretcher bearers, the timing of artillery, the moment when reinforcement arrives, or does not. Strategy reveals itself in blood and delay. As the first week closes, the tension tightens. Placing Montgomery ahead of Patton helped secure the landing. It delivered survival when survival was everything. But now that same decision risks becoming the explanation for why progress feels slow, why the enemy still stands, why victory has not yet revealed its shape. The question that hangs over Normandy is no longer whether the beaches can be held. It is whether patience, once essential, is about to be mistaken for failure, before the next phase of the plan is allowed to unfold. As the Normandy lodgment stabilizes, the character of the war begins to change. The beaches no longer define the struggle. Roads, hedgerows, and supply routes do. German resistance remains fierce, but its grip is no longer absolute. The moment Eisenhower has waited for, breakout, becomes possible. And with it comes the release of the general he has held in reserve. Patton enters the war as motion. His army does not advance so much as surge. Where Montgomery's battle fixed German forces in place, Patton's formations exploit the strain. Armored columns push through gaps with an urgency that feels almost violent after weeks of measured pressure. The pursuit begins, not as an improvisation, but as the second movement of a design long in preparation. For the first time, the coalition's sequence becomes visible to those on the ground. One general holds the enemy's attention, absorbing resistance and preventing redeployment. The other breaks the line's spine, turning pressure into collapse. Neither role is glamorous in isolation. Together, they produce decision. Churchill watches this transformation with mixed emotion. Relief comes first. The speed promises liberation. Towns freed, flags raised, momentum restored. Yet apprehension follows closely behind. Speed courts danger. Overextension invites counterstroke. And Patton's intensity, so useful in movement, carries the perennial risk of political drama that could once again strain alliance nerves. In French villages, the contrast is stark. Residents experience two kinds of war in quick succession. First comes slow attrition, artillery, patrols, and cautious advances that grind forward almost invisibly. Then comes sudden thunder, tanks appearing without warning, columns racing through streets, the sound of engines replacing the long wait. To those who live beneath it, the difference feels absolute. In reality, both phases belong to the same plan. For Eisenhower, the earlier choice gains its full meaning in these days. Montgomery was the anchor. He absorbed pressure and held ground when collapse was the greatest risk. Patton is the spearhead. He converts stability into motion and motion into liberation. Neither role alone could have carried the campaign. Together, they give it shape. This is not harmony in the sentimental sense. Friction remains. Personalities still clash. Criticism does not vanish simply because progress accelerates. Yet the alliance begins to win precisely because it is forced into rhythm by a commander willing to sequence strengths rather than reconcile them. As this turning phase closes, the moral complexity sharpens. Victory does not emerge from perfect agreement or unified temperament. It comes from leadership that accepts conflict, contains it, and then deploys it at the right moment. In Normandy, the blade is finally released, but only because it was held long enough to strike where it would matter most. As the campaign in France continues, a quieter contest begins to unfold behind the front lines. Victories accumulate, towns are liberated, and the enemy retreats, but reputations begin to compete with results. Success, instead of silencing debate, generates its own internal struggles over credit, responsibility, and interpretation. The war is still being fought, yet its story is already being written. Bernard Montgomery's role becomes a point of division. He is defended as essential to the survival of the lodgment, the commander whose caution fixed German forces and made breakout possible. At the same time, he is criticized as slow, as a general whose methods delayed momentum and tested patience. Both judgments contain truth, and neither tells the whole story. His contribution cannot be separated from the context that demanded it. George Patton's reputation evolves just as quickly. He is praised as decisive, the embodiment of speed that turns opportunity into collapse. He is also criticized as reckless, a commander whose aggression courts danger and political embarrassment. Again, both assessments are accurate in part. Patton's effectiveness is inseparable from the restraint that preceded his release. Churchill moves carefully through this emerging narrative battlefield. Britain needs its dignity preserved. The country cannot appear marginal in a victory it helped sustain for years. America needs its partnership respected. Its power must be acknowledged without provoking resentment. And above all, the enemy must continue to see unity, not fracture. Words now become instruments of strategy. Away from microphones and communiques, ordinary soldiers measure leadership by simpler standards. They notice whether replacements arrive when casualties mount, whether rations follow advances, whether artillery support appears when promised. For them, command is not a myth, but a system that either functions or fails. The arguments of generals matter only insofar as they shape survival. Here, a late revelation settles in. The memory of the war is not formed afterward, at ceremonies or in memoirs. It is shaped during the war itself, through press briefings, official statements, and quiet political calculations made while outcomes are still uncertain. What is emphasized, what is omitted, and what is softened begins to harden into accepted truth long before the last shot is fired. The sober note is unavoidable. Command decisions are judged by outcomes, cleanly and finally. But they are made under fog, partial information, human limits, and competing pressures that never appear in monuments. The victories endure. The arguments fade. And what remains is a simplified memory of choices that were anything but simple when they were made. With the distance of weeks and victories, Churchill's support for Montgomery takes on a different shape. It is no longer simply a defense of a commander under criticism. It reveals itself as an act of national maintenance. Britain's morale, after years of strain, is not a background condition. It is a strategic asset. If it collapses, divisions follow. If it holds, endurance remains possible. Churchill understands the thinness of the line he walks. If Britain feels humiliated, if its experience is dismissed and its sacrifices reduced, the alliance weakens from within. Resentment hardens quietly, and cooperation becomes transactional. Yet, if America feels constrained, if its power appears managed by caution it did not choose, the alliance fractures in a different direction. Confidence turns to impatience. Partnership turns to rivalry. Either outcome threatens the structure holding the war together. At the center of this balance stands Eisenhower. Churchill recognizes his necessity with unusual clarity. Only a supreme commander with real authority can keep powerful egos from becoming policy disasters. Eisenhower's strength is not brilliance in isolation, but legitimacy, the ability to issue decisions that both sides will ultimately accept, even when they disagree. Undermining him, even subtly, would unravel the very mechanism that makes coalition war possible. Here lies the paradox of Churchill's leadership. Privately, doubts persist. He is not blind to Montgomery's limitations, nor unaware of American frustration. But publicly, loyalty becomes essential. Leadership, in this moment, is the art of controlled contradiction, holding private skepticism alongside public commitment. To reveal uncertainty too openly would invite instability at the worst possible time. As the story widens, Overlord emerges as more than military liberation. It is the construction of a post-war order, assembled piece by piece through cooperation. The habits formed here, how disagreements are managed, how credit is shared, how authority is respected, will shape the peace as surely as they shape the war. Churchill understands that the future is being rehearsed under fire. The moral irony sharpens. The war against tyranny is being won by democracies that must constantly negotiate with themselves. There is no single will, no imposed harmony. Progress comes through argument, compromise, and restraint, through the acceptance that unity is not natural, but maintained. Seen in this light, Churchill's words during the crisis take on their full meaning. They are less about Patton or Montgomery as individuals, and more about preventing pride from becoming sabotage. He is not choosing one general over another. He is choosing cohesion over gratification, stability over vindication. The consequence is quiet but enduring. Britain retains confidence without demanding dominance. America exercises power without dismantling partnership. Eisenhower commands without being isolated. And the alliance, strained but intact, continues forward. In the end, what Churchill protects is not a reputation, but a belief that nations fighting side by side can endure disagreement without letting it become division. And without that belief, no victory, however decisive, could have been sustained. The story returns, inevitably, to the question at its center. What did Churchill say when Eisenhower placed Montgomery ahead of Patton? In essence, he offered an argument for unity over preference, for structure over impulse. He reminded the alliance that command is not about satisfying ambition, but about sustaining cooperation long enough for ambition to matter. Judged across its full arc, Eisenhower's decision reveals its logic. The invasion required an anchor first, a force and a temperament capable of absorbing shock and holding ground, when retreat would have been the easier instinct. It required a blade second, a commander built for speed, exploitation, and collapse once stability had been secured. And above both, it required a supreme commander willing to absorb criticism from all sides in order to keep the sequence intact. Montgomery's role settles into balance. His caution preserved the foothold in Normandy at a moment when survival was the only victory available. That same caution, extended beyond its moment, generated controversy and frustration. Both realities coexist. History, when honest, allows them to stand together. Patton's role settles into balance as well. His speed transformed opportunity into decision, turning pressure into liberation. Yet his volatility made timing essential. Released too early, he risked fracture. Released when the moment was right, he became decisive. His effectiveness was inseparable from restraint. From this balance emerges Churchill's lesson. Nations do not win wars solely by appointing the most brilliant individuals. They win by accepting imperfect arrangements, by recognizing that coalition war demands compromise, patience, and a willingness to subordinate pride to purpose. The hardest command is not issuing orders under fire. It is keeping allies aligned when success makes disagreement louder, not quieter. The final philosophical turn is stark. Ego in war is not merely a personality flaw. It is a strategic risk. Unchecked, it fractures alliances, distorts judgment, and turns strength inward. Managed carefully, it can be delayed, sequenced, and even harnessed. And so the story closes where it began, not with a battle, but with a choice. They argued over who should lead the first step onto France, until Churchill reminded them that without unity, no one would take the second.